In my recent video on Neon Genesis Evangelion, I described how that series is generally considered to have launched the Sekai-kei trend in anime and manga, a genre label used to describe a flurry of series that seem to follow in the footsteps of Evangelion, crafting stories that intertwine internal drama, usually that of teenagers, with some kind of world-changing tragedy. In her dissertation Sekai-kei as Existentialist Narrative, Stephanie Thomas describes the Sekai-kei as being built around the omission of a mediating social dimension between individual characters and an apocalyptic large-scale situation. And Sonny Boy does follow the journey of a group of characters who have explicitly been extracted from their societal context and left to their own devices, their individual personalities very much affecting their surroundings on a large scale through their use of superpowers and through a manipulation of the rules of the worlds they inhabit. Add to this the characteristic withdrawn and indecisive male protagonist, as well as the confrontation with grand metaphysical forces, and I think it's fair to say that Sonny Boy does land somewhere in this lineage of Sekai-kei stories. That being said, this series certainly proposes a new approach to this kind of narrative. Where Sonny Boy stands out is in how it seemingly gives to the grandest of adventures the most insignificant of outcomes. When the anime comes to an end, our main characters have traversed a reality-warping realm that allows them to go against the will of God himself and return to their original reality, leaving behind a world of potentialities lost to the flow of time. It's a bit complicated, to say the least. But what do these characters do once they finally get back from this mind-bending adventure? Well, not much. They don't confront God, they don't change the system, go back and save their friends, they just live their lives. When Shinji makes his big decision in End of Evangelion, the world is altered forever. A statement has been made. But when Sonny Boy's protagonist Nagara returns to reality, the effects of his decision are virtually non-existent. In fact, many aspects of this show's narrative feel incomplete in this way, somewhat underwhelming. So what is the true significance of Sonny Boy's apparently insignificant ending? The show's premise immediately brings to mind such stories as Lord of the Flies, The Drifting Classroom, or Jules Verne's 2 Years Vacation. But with its superpowered cast, bizarre worlds, and fast-moving plot that gets wrapped up in only 12 episodes, Sonny Boy's narrative becomes exponentially more complex with each passing episode, very quickly leaving the realm of simple adventure stories that focus on creating a microcosm of society in order to examine the inner workings of social dynamics towards something much more intricate. But this complexity is our first clue as to what this series is really all about. It is not something to be decoded like a conventional mystery. This overwhelming confusion is an integral aspect of the work's message. As creator Natsume Shingo has stated, Sonny Boy is about boys and girls who square off against the illogical. The theme of this work is the frustrations and difficulties that anyone has felt through living. Every subjective point of view, no matter what it is, has its own form of correctness. One of the themes of the story is the children who continue to resist the illogicality that is born from that subjectivity. All the confusion and mysteries present in the narrative serve to express this confrontation with the illogical. This is Natsume's approach to the coming-of-age story, and this illogicality that results from the confusion of subjectivities is expressed in a number of ways. It is first of all apparent in the incredibly diverse artwork found throughout the anime. The ever-changing worlds of Sonny Boy give the animators the opportunity to dip in and out of different styles, and this multiplicity of artistic voices comes as the result of the immense freedom given to the artists working on this project, producing an overflow of artistic expression, an anime bursting at the seams with creativity. Everything gives the impression of a world that could change at any given moment, which is of course literally the case within the show's narrative. And the character designs and backgrounds reflect this. These brightly coloured shapes and forms almost bleed into one another. There's a fluidity to the world and characters, a stylistic penchant that Natsume perhaps inherited from his mentor, Yuasa Masaaki. However, the most incongruous element of the work, in my view, is its purposefully fractured editing, both in the moment-to-moment montage, but also on the larger scale of the overarching story itself. The series demonstrates a very laid-back and somewhat messy approach to narrative construction. It feels kind of volatile in a way that matches the animation. It could go in any direction. In fact, producer Mukeiichi Motoki encouraged Natsume to include a new twist in each episode to keep the audience engaged, and the in media res opening contributes to this sense of mystery that keeps the viewer hooked. We're already in the void, already in the thick of the mystery, and the rest of the series builds on this by constantly jumping around different characters' perspectives, as well as jumping around in time, never quite providing the full picture. And the show's extensive use of ellipses further alienates the viewer, feeding into Natsume's desire to create an illogical experience, one where not only the characters but the viewers themselves must find ways to reconcile this strange and elusive narrative with their own worldview.
心の奥底は自分でも覗けない。
ちょっと浅風く
ん。俺どうして。
This editing style feels more like connecting thematic dots rather than advancing through the plot in a linear fashion. But where this elliptical approach to storytelling may prove frustrating for some viewers is in how the anime handles its characters and plot developments. By the end of the series, we may feel as though Sonny Boy has failed to adequately explain itself, or provide satisfying conclusions to many of its characters' storylines, almost as if entire chunks of the plot have been removed or condensed. I'd even go so far as to say that, in the end, Sonny Boy is nothing but loose ends. But of course, I don't think this is a flaw. In fact, I think this is the show's greatest strength, and what makes it stand out as a particularly memorable experience. Sonny Boy provides us with that very special feeling of having only caught a glimpse of a moment, a glimpse of these people's lives, rather than having observed a complete picture that leaves nothing to the imagination. The incomplete storylines of secondary characters, and to be honest, even the main characters, imply the continuation of their lives beyond the scope of the series. It is an anime made of 1,000 threads, each going off in different directions. Because Natsume gives great freedom to the individual components of his work, he doesn't seek to wrap everything up neatly at the end. And despite the grand sci-fi mystery that lies at the show's core, Sonny Boy often veers off into a more episodic structure, reminiscent of works like Kino's Journey, for example, taking time to ponder specific philosophical or moral questions within the context of self-contained stories. This is especially the case in episode 11, when Rajdhani returns from his travels and recounts two separate tales that very much feel like small fables meant to impart some kind of moral that informs or in some way reflects our main character's journeys. Sonny Boy's narrative stands somewhere between this episodic format and the serialized mystery-driven narrative that its premise and major plot developments hinge on. At the drop of a hat, we can jump from an episode about Nagara playing baseball to an episode that completely transforms our character's conception of reality. This creates a very disorienting effect, which in some way diminishes the impact of such mind-blowing twists. These moments are not really given time to breathe. They're handled the same way any other plot development would be. This has the effect of essentially leveling the grand sci-fi concepts and small character beats to the same plane of importance, which according to Gainax's co-founder Okada Toshio is the essence of the Sekai Kei. The big twist of the show's midpoint, or episode 12's dimension-jumping journey, are made to feel almost normal. And the consequence of this is that when we do finally return to the normal world, things feel positively abnormal. No superpowers, no dramatic twists, no supernatural worlds to explore, only a rainy day at school, a girl you watch from afar, someone you used to know. Cold, grey reality. Which leads us to the conclusion of our protagonist's arc. Inaction is the central flaw of this character, and the tension between his desire to act and the confusion that arises from the many possibilities that lie before him and his inability to commit himself to a particular ethic is the driving force of his entire arc. And the flurry of strange worlds and moral quandaries that he and the other characters encounter is representative of this tension, this uncertainty about the future, which path to take. And so naturally it's what we expect to see concluded in this final sequence, especially since we once again return to a situation where Nagara is given the opportunity to help a dying bird, and he's even confronted with Nozomi, the character who has been pulling him out of his passivity throughout the entire story, and is also something of a love interest for his character. And so it appears that everything is pointing toward this scene being the perfect resolution for his character. He accepts to take on the burden of caring for this animal, thus overcoming his apathy and inertia once and for all, while at the same time maybe even bonding with Nozomi, giving the audience the satisfaction of knowing that maybe one day these two might finally get together. But none of that really happens. Instead, he fumbles through the interaction, refusing the offer to take care of the bird, and Nozomi just returns to Asakaze. And the anime ends with Nagara simply walking away. And this is where I feel the true effect of Sonny Boy's inversion of significance, because this one moment of quiet, awkward, and slightly dissatisfying human interaction reveals itself to me as much more poignant than almost anything else that's happened in the series so far. And that includes our characters realizing that they have been rejected by God, and that their real selves back in the real world are moving on without them, that they are simply the rejects of an endless ocean of potential futures. But why is that? Why is this one moment just as moving, or even more so, than the plot's many shocking twists and turns? I think it's because in this moment, I realized that maybe the idea of nothing happening at all would be a much more devastating apocalypse than the world itself coming to an end. Because the inability to change the outside world leaves only the self to be worked on. This ending reduces the scope of the story to a microscopic scale. After an adventure that made explicit the underlying complexity and confusion of the real world by exteriorizing the inner workings of intertwining subjectivities, we return to that one small world that maybe we can control, the one mystery we can slowly decode, the self. But in the end, did Nagara really accomplish anything? Did he really change? He didn't get the girl after all, he didn't even pursue her. But he did leave with a smile, and he did make the decision to go to the train station and check on the bird in the first place. And if it wasn't for all those supposedly meaningless worlds, all those stories, all those what-ifs, he might not have. It might have been just another rainy day. And so, even if that smile, that single moment of bliss, was all he got from this adventure, it was still worth it. The ending tells us that Nagara will not immediately be rewarded with a girlfriend just for being active and considerate for once in his life. If he was doing it just for Nozomi, that would kind of defeat the purpose. He's doing it for himself. He's doing it to better himself. We may not see what this change in his personality will eventually lead to, but we do see the change, and that should be enough. At every moment of our lives, there hangs 1,000 maybes, suspended in a realm of potential. And Sonny Boy is a story that teaches us to value and nurture that voice within us that urges us to smile, urges us to move forward. Perhaps this kind of narrative does leave us feeling even more powerless in the face of an ever-changing, complex adult world. But it also leaves us with a much more optimistic outlook on how we can choose to operate within this world, how we choose to interpret the meaning and significance of our presence in this complex reality. It might be an illogical world composed of contradictory subjectivities, but it's also a world where we can smile if we really want to. And if cultural critic Asaba Michiaki is right in describing the Sekai-kei as a story where personal crisis and the crisis of the entire world become synchronized, then Sonny Boy is perhaps one of the most important entries in the genre, one that manages to infuse the most insignificant of moments with all the profundity of a world-changing event.
今目と目が合ったその瞬間からダウンロードされた全て許された